From the moment Kate Middleton disappeared from public life for an extended period, something about the entire situation felt deeply unusual. Not because the public expected constant appearances from her, but because the palace chose a communication strategy that seemed designed to amplify suspicion rather than ease it. In an era where transparency is expected, especially from public institutions, and especially in moments of genuine concern, the palace's approach felt outdated, rigid, and strangely evasive. They asked the world to respect her privacy, a reasonable request, but paired that request with silence so absolute that even neutral observers began to wonder what was going on. And what sparked those questions wasn't a lack of sympathy or understanding. It was the palace's own confusing, inconsistent, and often contradictory messaging that created more noise than clarity. For weeks, the public was left in a void where speculation grew, not because people wished to pry into Kate's personal struggles, but because the palace refused to offer even the simplest form of stable, reliable communication. No timelines, no straightforward press briefings, no confirmation of what to expect, and no acknowledgement of the public's growing concern. In that vacuum, people naturally tried to piece together what little bits of information were available. The problem wasn't Kate's absence, it was how poorly the institution handled that absence. The royal family, with its vast resources and professional communication teams, treated the situation like a storyline they could quietly manage behind the scenes, as if the world wouldn't notice inconsistencies or fill the silence with questions. But this is a different era. The public no longer accepts vague statements and cryptic updates, especially from a taxpayer-supported institution whose entire modern-day existence depends on maintaining trust and credibility. Things escalated dramatically when the infamous Mother's Day photo appeared, an image meant to reassure the public, but instead became the lightning rod for international controversy. Major global photo agencies, organizations that rarely intervene in royal imagery, took the unprecedented step of issuing kill notices, warning clients around the world that the image had been manipulated. That moment shattered whatever trust remained. Because if a palace is willing to release an edited family photo during a moment of heightened scrutiny, what message does that send? Instead of calming the public, that single action poured fuel onto suspicions, not because the public wished to doubt Kate herself, but because the palace presented an image that contradicted their insistence that everything was normal. People weren't looking for flaws. They were reacting to what experts identified as obvious inconsistencies in the photo, and the palace's silence only magnified the problem. Even after the photo scandal, the institution didn't adjust its communication strategy. Instead, the statements that followed seemed reactive, defensive, and tone-deaf to the growing concerns swirling across global media. One day, the palace insisted Kate was doing well. The next day, there were whispers of major surgery, and then later, suggestions that she needed extended recovery time. These conflicting signals did nothing to reassure the public. They only communicated one thing clearly: the palace did not have a coherent narrative. And when an institution famous for highly curated, carefully orchestrated public appearances suddenly starts contradicting itself, it is only natural for people to wonder what is happening behind the scenes. Not because they wish to question Kate, but because they doubt the messaging coming from the institution that controls her public image. Then came the video, the one clip that was meant to settle the tension once and for all. But instead of bringing clarity, the video introduced a whole new wave of questions. The timing alone felt strategic, dropped right at the peak of global headlines demanding answers. The style of the video was controlled, highly staged yet emotionally heavy, and the careful delivery felt less like a spontaneous personal update and more like a scripted piece produced to manage a crisis. Again, none of this reflects on Kate as an individual. It reflects on how the palace chose to present her. The lighting, the stiff presentation, the unusual styling choices, and the overall composition created a sense of distance rather than comfort. Many observers felt the video seemed like a response, crafted not because the palace wanted to share information, but because they had reached a point where silence was no longer sustainable. People noticed details. Not because they wanted to be critical, but because the palace left them with no other information to work with. The appearance choices looked unlike anything typically associated with someone who has access to the best stylists, resources, and professional presentation teams. The wig in particular drew attention, not because people wanted to scrutinize her appearance, but because it didn't align with what one would expect from a family that has historically obsessed over perfectly curated public imagery. When a detail looks off, especially in a moment where trust is already fragile, people are going to ask why. And again, the issue is not her appearance, it's the palace's decision-making. If an institution that controls the narrative so tightly presents visuals that don't match their own standards, the result is confusion, not comfort. What made everything even more questionable was the refusal to follow up with anything substantial after the video. Normally, when public figures step away for health or personal reasons, their teams provide periodic updates or at least give a sense of timing. But here, the palace retreated back into silence as though the video had resolved everything. It didn't. If anything, it intensified the belief that the palace was using a fragmented communication strategy that didn't respect the intelligence or emotional investment of the public. A modern institution cannot behave like it's still 1950, when people simply accepted whatever vague explanation was delivered from behind closed doors. Today's world demands clarity, especially when the institution benefits from public funding, public attention, and public loyalty. Critics have pointed out repeatedly that the palace created this problem for themselves. Every piece of confusion, every unanswered question, every inconsistent message stemmed from decisions made behind palace walls. They could have established a clear timeline. They could have given a transparent explanation. They could have avoided releasing manipulated images. They could have communicated regularly, instead of waiting for speculation to spiral out of control. They could have treated the public with respect, instead of assuming that people would just accept no comment for months on end. Instead, they opted for a style of control that no longer works in the digital age, believing that mystery and silence would be interpreted as dignity. It wasn't. It was interpreted as incompetence and secrecy. Now, months later, the damage to the palace's credibility is apparent. The public is not questioning Kate as a person. They are questioning the institution that has repeatedly mishandled their own narrative. They are questioning why the palace creates more confusion than clarity. They are questioning why modern communication standards seem impossible for an institution with endless staff, resources, and experience. They are questioning why basic honesty seems so difficult for an establishment that claims to represent stability and integrity. When people say things don't add up, they are expressing frustration with the palace, not the individual at the center of the story. It's the institution's job to communicate clearly, compassionately, and consistently. And this time, they failed on every front. The secrecy, the missteps, the manipulated photo, the reactive video, the inconsistent updates, all of it painted a picture of an institution struggling to control a narrative rather than offering truth. And in the absence of trust, even the simplest statements will be questioned. The palace wanted the world to move on quickly, but that's not how trust works. Trust requires transparency. Trust requires honesty. Trust requires communication. And this situation revealed just how out of touch the institution remains with those basic principles. Instead of easing concern, they created skepticism. Instead of maintaining dignity, they created confusion. Instead of showing leadership, they showed panic. And instead of respecting the public, they underestimated them. In the end, the questions surrounding the palace's handling of this situation aren't going away because they were never properly addressed. The public didn't create the confusion. The palace did. And until they learn how to communicate like a modern institution, situations like this will continue to unfold in ways that feel questionable, inconsistent, and deeply mismanaged. People don't doubt Kate. They doubt the palace. And based on the events of the past months, it's not hard to see why.